Buenas tardes, buenas noches a todos, todas, todes los que están aquí hoy. Mi nombre es Ari Martínez Román, soy egresada de esta escuela de Derecho, profesora también aquí, adjunta. Fui decana de estudiantes de esta escuela, me honró desde el 2010 hasta el 2017 y soy la directora ejecutiva, codirectora de Right to Democracy, una organización sin fines de lucro que trabaja para promover un movimiento, la formación de un movimiento que confronte el marco colonial que afecta a los 5 territorios coloniales de Estados Unidos. Antes de dar comienzo, voy a invitar al decano asociado de la escuela que venga a dar unas palabras de bienvenida.
Good evening. Buenas noches. Una bienvenida muy cordial y breve para nuestras invitadas. We're glad that you're here to have this conversation with us. Welcome. La decana Neptune pide que se le excuse porque lleva todo el día trabajando en la rectoría y me ha pedido que diga una breve palabra de bienvenida. Estamos contentos de tener aquí a Adi. Esta es su casa, ya lo sabe, siempre que viene, y estamos confiados en que ustedes podrán tener una conversación amena y profunda sobre un tema extraordinariamente complejo como son las formas de la opresión política, las formas sofisticadas que tiene el poder para ejercer algún tipo de control sobre países y territorios. Y estamos muy contentos de que sea en Puerto Rico donde un panel de mujeres que tienen una razón adicional para hablar de la violencia a todos los niveles, física y epistemológica, nos ayuden a repensar la complejidad de este problema. Así que, welcome again. Pleasant conversation.
Muchas gracias, decano. Bueno, en momentos de importantes retos democráticos, a nosotros nos pareció muy importante resaltar la labor de lideresas. ¿Ya? ¿Mejor? Ok, bien. Resaltar la labor de lideresas de los territorios coloniales de Estados Unidos que defienden y protegen los derechos a una gobernanza democrática. En este conversatorio de mujeres líderes por la democracia en los territorios coloniales de Estados Unidos, gracias a la Fundación de Mujeres, al Programa de Democracia y Participación Ciudadana, y con nosotros en Right to Democracy, queremos resaltar el trabajo arduo por una democracia plena y equitativa. Nos visitan nuestros hermanos del Caribe, nuestras hermanas también del Pacífico, para contarnos sus experiencias y los retos que enfrentan en la misión de empoderar voces marginadas en la democracia local, territorial y a nivel de Estados Unidos. También quería destacar a los estudiantes del Pro Bono que nos han ayudado a organizar esta actividad. Tenemos a Ángel Rodríguez de tercer año, portavoz del Pro Bono de Democracia y Participación Ciudadana. Tenemos a Silvia Torres Ortiz de tercer año de Derecho, presidenta del Federal Bar Association, capítulo estudiantil de la Universidad de Puerto Rico. Tenemos a Natalia Jiménez, una estudiante de quinto año de Ciencias Políticas de aquí de la universidad, de la Asociación Puertorriqueña de Estudiantes de Ciencias Políticas. Y tenemos a José Luis Figueroa González, de primer año de Derecho, que representa hoy a la American Constitutional Society aquí en la escuela y el Pro Bono Democracia y Participación Ciudadana. Ahora voy a comenzar a presentar a cada una de las panelistas de manera individual, pero quiero que también ella tenga unos minutos para presentarse a sí misma y contar su labor. Primero vamos a pasar por la casa con la abogada, colega, amiga, ex alumna de esta servidora, egresada de esta escuela y líder comunitaria de la comunidad Buenavista Atorrey. Toda su vida, mi gente, desde que era bien joven, ha ocupado espacios de liderato, primero en el grupo de jóvenes IDIHAC en las comunidades del G8, del Caño, Martín Peña, como parte también de la Junta Comunitaria y fue su presidenta de la Junta Comunitaria, la más joven en la historia de su comunidad. Al presente es directora ejecutiva de Firmes Unidos Residentes por la Abogacía y mentora del pro bono Democracia y Participación Ciudadana de esta escuela. Naida, ¿te presentan unos minutitos para nuestro público?
Hola, buenas noches.
¿Cómo me presento? ¡Qué estrés!
Me presento como una mujer de 33 años, egresada de esta escuela, y contenta de estar aquí desde otro lado, ¿verdad? Un poco extraño cuando uno está en los salones y cogiendo clase y estar aquí hablando, pues ciertamente un poco más extraño. Estamos sacando la cuenta, pues aparentemente llevo involucrada en asuntos comunitarios hace 20 años, eso suena un montón, pero como desde los 12 años pues tuve la oportunidad de participar de un grupo de jóvenes que son los líderes jóvenes en acción, del Caño Martín Peña. Después de ahí, efectivamente, la vida me movió a distintos espacios, terminé siendo la presidenta de mi junta. Eso me llevó a tener la oportunidad de representar a mi país en distintos espacios, incluyendo, ¿verdad?, ciudades fuera de Puerto Rico. Y de allá para acá, pues yo estudié periodismo mira aquí llegó mi madre. También se llama Naida. Tuve la oportunidad de estudiar periodismo un poco, porque ya no se llama poco, lamentablemente, y ya no existe el edificio. Anyways, estudié periodismo y después de estudiar periodismo fue un poco como que, yo identifico el periodismo como una herramienta para llegar a justicia social, pero en aquel momento se me hacía un poco insuficiente y entonces decidí entrar a la escuela de Derecho. Y ahora tengo el honor de dirigir una organización que realmente se dedica a asegurar los derechos de personas en sus distintos espacios, se dedica a apoyar luchas en distintos contextos, obviamente todo lo relacionado a la justicia social, justicia ambiental, y ¿verdad?, asegurar que la gente tenga un bienestar colectivo, que pues esa debería ser la prioridad de cada país. Pero más allá de eso, yo me presento como una hija. Aprovecho que mi mamá está aquí, fui criada por un hogar matriarcal, eso significa que mi mamá y mi abuela, ¿verdad?, fueron mis principales figuras y las que me llevan a tener la personalidad que tengo en el día de hoy, las que me enseñaron a que uno trabaja, ¿verdad?, por tu hogar, pero también trabaja por y para los demás, y pues creo que es un poco lo he tratado de llevar de a poquito en mi carrera. Y igual, ahora tengo el honor, a través de que Martín Peña tuve las oportunidades, y ahora con el rol que ejerzo desde mi organización, tengo el privilegio de rodearme de mujeres extraordinarias que hacen de tipos corazones para asegurar el bienestar de su gente, así que pues creo que todo eso abona a quien soy.
Muchas gracias, Naida. Next, we have attorney Jackie Georgi. Jackie has 25 years experience on lawyering in the courts of Guam, the District Court of Guam, courts of Northern Mariana Islands, the District Court for the Northern Mariana Islands, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court of the United States. Attorney Georgi serves as the Guam Bar Association president, and she has been there since August of 2017 till today. They don't want to let her go. So, she's amazing. She is a member of the American Bar Association, National Conference of Bar Presidents, Board of Trustees of the Public Defender Service Corp, an advisory committee member of the Judicial Council of Guam, and last but not least, a proud mother of 8 wonderful and beautiful children. Can you introduce yourself, Jackie, a little bit, and what do you do in Guam, and how do you work on democracy?
Thank you, Addie. First of all, Hafe, thank you so much for being here tonight to talk about the work that we do in the territories. I started basically as just a student, you know. I was born and raised in Guam. I'm from the native people of Guam. And as a student, as a child, no one explained to me that there was a difference. I was raised learning American principles. I had no clue about about the difference between native rights and American principles until I was in law school. And when I went to law school, when I tried to write a paper about my own rights and how I saw the political status of Guam as it relates to the United States, I got very little guidance from my counselors. And that really surprised me. But I didn't pursue this route. When I came to Guam in 1999, I practiced law and completely ignored the fact of the political status of the island. Ignored it. Why? Because it's taboo to talk about these issues. It's taboo to fight for the rights of the people. The people should accept where they're at in governance. And that for me did not sit very well, especially when I started learning a little bit more of the history of Guam and the importance of the rights of the people. About 7 years ago, I was elected as the first female Chamorro Bar Association president. And that's where my journey kind of began, just 7 years ago. Think of that, I've been practicing law for 25 years. And in the little cases that I worked, I was always looking for the application of the rights of the people of Guam, how to involve. And so in litigation contexts, I always try to raise the issue when appropriate. But it wasn't until I became president that I started seeing that there appeared to be almost a concerted effort to keep the territories apart, so that we're not educated about the plight of each other. And that's where it became very clear to me that it was necessary to start working towards not only an educational component of our schools on Guam, but also at a national level to start making friends. Addie's one of those friends. So we collected basically a grouping of friends where we basically helped each other understand kind of the different issues that impact our territories, but impact all of our territories, but in a different way. And so as the bar president, I've started to make very strong efforts to connect ourselves with national organizations and with the different universities, between the University of the Philippines, the Puerto Rico University, and also the University of Hawaii, in trying to bring to light kind of the issues that we have as a territory, right, of the 5 territories of the United States. So that's kind of where I really focused a lot of my bar efforts. As an attorney, it's been very difficult to advance legal issues because of the application of the insular cases. I don't know how familiar everyone is with those. But even at the kind of the local level, we have lots of challenges, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, about how the local challenges have implicated our political status as well. But I'll save that for later.
Thank you, Jackie. So back to the Caribbean, another great friend, we have Dr. Hadia Stewart. She's an Africana philosopher from the island of St. John's in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Currently serves as the director of the Virgin Islands Caribbean Cultural Center at the University of the Virgin Islands. They recently held a visiting scholar position in the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice at Brown University and a research fellowship in the African and African American Studies program at Stanford University. Stewart is also the president and co-founder of St. John Ho, the St. John Heritage Collective, a land rights and cultural heritage preservation nonprofit in St. John's, U.S. Virgin Islands, and a founding member of the Virgin Islands Studies Collective. Hadia, welcome. to Puerto Rico. And please, can you introduce yourself and the work you do?
Thank you, Addie, and buenas noches. It's so beautiful to be able to share space with you and to be in conversation with each of you. The work that you're doing with Right to Democracy, but also bringing all of us together. I think it's always a blessing and a privilege to be able to talk across the waters and to be in conversations about our experiences with colonialism in the Caribbean and the Pacific, and American colonialism specifically. As a philosopher, I say that I started doing this work in part because my grandfather was a Vietnam vet. And as a child, I lost him pretty early to exposure to Agent Orange. And I would visit his grave often, as is required in a lot of Caribbean spiritual traditions. And there was always this little American flag perched on his tomb, and I could not quite reconcile this flag, this position on his tomb, in part because, of course, as territorial inhabitants, we can't vote for President of the United States. We have a non-voting representative in Congress, and I was looking at the impact of American colonization in the Virgin Islands and attempting to understand what freedom and democracy means to us as colonized people, as the descendants of people who have participated in and fought in the U.S. Armed Forces. And as a philosopher, I grew up in the Virgin Islands. I did my BA in sociology, actually, in the continental United States, and my PhD in Africana Studies. And I find that it's always beautiful to grapple with colonialism at multiple levels, because we know that that form of oppression pertains to our political status, but it also impacts almost every area of our lives. And so in doing work with the St. John Heritage Collective, St. Johnco, we really fight for land rights. St. John is a small island, it's only 21 square miles, and it's over 2/3 national park. And so given the fact that over 2/3 of our island is occupied by a federal entity, it really raised a lot of questions about the relationship between environmental injustices, environmentalisms, and the colonial order. And so we find ourselves really pushing for land rights, grappling with what feminism means to us as colonized people, thinking through even our spiritual practices and how colonialism has interrupted our spiritual traditions, and also mothering to young people who are also always interrogating colonialism and even trying to understand what the upcoming election cycle would mean for us, and having to explain to young children the fact that we are unable to vote for president also then raises another set of questions about what pathways we are charting for ourselves and what freedom can really look like for us. And so in addition to doing work with St. Johnco, the university, and doing spiritual work, I find that I'm also deeply committed to this question of constitutional development. And so I'm actually running for delegate to the 6th Constitutional Convention of the Virgin Islands, and really trying to grapple the 6th, really grappling with what pathways are possible for us as we work towards decolonization. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Olivia. I see that there is VI people in the public. Yes, welcome. Good. So now I'm going to introduce Sheila Babauta, your friend too, born and raised on the island of Saipan. She served 4 years in public office, holding key leadership positions such as chair of the Natural Resources Committee and floor leader for the Saipan and Northern Islands Legislative Delegation. Her long-standing commitment to service is evident throughout nonprofit organizations such as the Friends of the Marianas Trench, our Commonwealth 670, and Micronesian Climate Change Alliance. She is an alum of the Obama Leaders Program, also a 2023 Environmental Justice Movement Fellow with the Tishman Design Center of the New School, and founder of Community Solutions. Sheila, can you talk a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do in Northern Marianas?
Yes, thank you, Addie. Buenas noches, gracias. Thank you for having us here. In our language, the Chamorro language, we say half a day. So you can say Hafe. Hafe. And in the Northern Mariana Islands, we have a second indigenous group that we officially recognize called the Carolinians, and the way we greet is Tiro. Tiro. Thank you. That was beautiful. And so I wanted to share our flag tonight. Yeah, so this is our flag from the Northern Mariana Islands. The flower crown, or the wand, represents the Carolinian people. The Laddie stone in the middle represents the Chamorro people. The Laddie stone holds up our homes, and the star in the middle represents our unique relationship with the United States. And so this is our beautiful flag with the blue representing the ocean, because we are a large ocean state. We are not a small developing island state. We are a large ocean state. Thank you, Hadia. Appreciate it. And so I'm a daughter of the Mariana Islands. I was born and raised on the sister island, Saipan. So in the Marianas, we are made up of 15 islands, including Guam. And that was the ancestors saying hello. And so we are a 15-island chain, with Guam being the southernmost island that was taken away for hundreds of years. And I like to share that because many forget or don't know that we were part of the same island chain, we're part of the same family, and the United States has separated us politically, culturally, and socially. You know, and so I'm very happy to be here with a sister from Guam, and so being born and raised on the island of Saipan, I too grew up not learning about the truth, about our history, about colonization, about how we became American citizens, and I was so eager to move away. I was so eager to move away from my home after I graduated high school. I lived away for 10 years. I lived in Hawaii. I went to school and gained my education, and I visited home after Super Typhoon Solar hit the Mariana Islands. It was the strongest typhoon that hit that year in the world, in the United States for sure, and it devastated our islands. I went home to visit, and I realized that I was ready to move home. And I missed my home so much. And when I moved home, there was a big boom in foreign investment coming from China, and they were building unsustainably. In my district alone, 7 permits for hotels were approved. And I was attending public hearings, speaking up, and community members were coming to me, giving me questions to ask at the hearings, because there was so much fear around speaking up and just asking questions. And so my journey began there, in the public meeting, public hearing space. I ran for office. It was an experience being in the political arena. And then I was introduced to the militarization of our homeland and the devastating, destructive plans that the U.S. military still has to this day for the Mariana Islands. And we're experiencing hyper-militarization in our home with 5 bases on the island, our sister island of Guam. Our sister island, Tinian, is occupied 2/3 as well by the U.S. military. Our sister island, Marianas and Puerto Rico, has been used as a bombing practice range for almost 50 years. And the plans that the U.S. military has looks to take more of our sister islands and really see us as a sacrifice zone. So in my experience in politics and in the environmental justice movement, the demilitarization movement, the decolonization movement, it really was about perspective. How the United States saw us was not the same as how we saw ourselves and how we saw our relationship with the United States. And so, through these community spaces, I now serve on the board of Micronesia Climate Change Alliance, where we do decolonization work and cultural revival restoration work. I'm also the chair of Friends of the Mariana Trench. We do ocean conservation work. I'm actually here for the America the Beautiful Coalition gathering that's happening this week. It's a national initiative set by the Biden administration to preserve and conserve 30% of the U.S. resources by 2030. And I am a co-founder of Our Commonwealth 670, where we work on demilitarization efforts, which is very complex and very complicated. As a U.S. territory, we are one of the most, we hold the highest rate of enlisted servicemen and women in the United States. And so I've been introduced to military, recruitment since I was a little girl. But with the death of many of our family members, my mom's baby brother died in the Iraqi war when I was in high school. It really did also, really invited me and my family to reflect on this relationship with the United States, because he wasn't even an American citizen. And so I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to have this conversation. It's always so interesting and amazing to me how much we have in common as U.S. colonies. And, a revolution is on its way, right? This is a revolution. And I'm very excited to be a part of it.
Gracias, Sheila. And I do have to mention that we did try to bring somebody from the American Samoa, another colonized islands of the United States, but it's difficult. It's very, very cuesta arriba. I'm going to speak in Spanish. Volar desde el Pacífico hasta acá son casi 30 horas, mi gente. Y luego, de American Samoa solo hay 2 vuelos, uno los lunes y otros los jueves, para salir desde American Samoa. Y el costo es exorbitante. Así que este trabajo realmente es posible porque hay organizaciones que nos están apoyando, y también porque, por ejemplo, la amiga Sheila Babauta iba a estar aquí en otra conferencia, la amiga Jackie Terlaggi quería venir acá a visitar a Puerto Rico, y por eso estas actividades hoy, porque coincidieron, y yo dije, Ardía tiene que venir, la voy a volar de Virgin Islands, y fue como que tenemos que hacer algo para juntarlo. Así que muchas gracias por estar aquí. Y pues como los estudiantes que participaron haciendo esta actividad, lo que hicimos es que cada uno de ellos va a hacer una pregunta particular a cada una de las panelistas. Luego de las preguntas particulares pasamos a una pregunta general y luego a las preguntas del público. Así que, José, tú tienes una pregunta para Jackie Terlaggi.
Standing up. Here we go. Okay. We know that Guam does not have a constitution, and there has been various efforts to increase the power of local governance. Can you explain to us some of those efforts and talk about the most recent litigation to block your latest plebiscite?
Let's see. First, let's talk history, right? Because I think it's very important always when we discuss the application of law to look at the context of the history of where we come, right? So much like Puerto Rico, Guam was under Spanish rule for 300 years. Guam did not become part of the United States until technically about 1899. And then we had a war, World War II. And World War II ended up that the Japanese occupied Guam. But the U.S. was already there. And the United States, prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, withdrew all but one soldier and left Guam unprotected. And as a result, it's said that about 60% of our population was killed as a result of the war. By 1950, we had only about 54,000 people living on the island. Only 300 of those people were non-Chamorro, right? And so in the 1950s, at that time, we were still under military control. So U.S. naval government control until our first elected governor, are you ready? 1970. Some people in this room are older than 1970. We won't name them, okay? We'll be nice, we're not naming names today. But think about this, only since 1970. And that came basically after this tremendous battle between the United States naval government, because remember, we are fighting with the military over our land, and our first Congress to Guam. So our first Congress to Guam had to have a sit-out, if you can imagine, right? This body of about 15 people demanding for the rights of the people of Guam. And as a result of that, we gained citizenship, right? And the right to have a first elected governor. Up until 1962, you could not enter or leave Guam without the permission of the naval arm of the Navy. You need to ask for permission to come in and out of Guam. So this was the control that Guam came from. And so when they fought for citizenship, you also have to remember the context. We were saved from the Japanese. The Japanese tortured and raped our women. They beheaded men in the presence of our children. The atrocities of war in the Pacific are horrendous. So as a result of the U.S. coming to rescue us from this, the people of Guam are very grateful. And even to this day, if you speak to the 90-year-olds, the 100-year-olds, they say they're very grateful that America came, right? So they're represented as the saviors in the Pacific, right? So they saved us from the Japanese. But you started to see that there was this battle, right? Because then the United States Congress decided to forgive Japan for Guam's atrocities. They didn't ask the Guamanians what they thought. And so as a result, they said, okay, we're going to give the people of Guam, those of you who lived through the war and some of your family members, we'll give you up to 10,000. Depends on if you were raped or not. Right? And that's the thing, when we talk about that context, you see there's something wrong, right? So these people, this Chamorro people who I'm from, right? But you have to also remember that I'm a product of the United States American system. I was taught to be an American. I know nothing else, right? And it wasn't until I realized there's something wrong that I started to explore for myself what this means, right? Why is it that our people had to ask for citizenship? Who were we before? And who we were just Guam nationals, right? Imagine that. It's like my dad was born in 1946. He was just a Guam national. What did that mean? That meant he didn't belong to anybody. He just lived on Guam. He resided on Guam. And so when they granted us citizenship in 1951, that has continued. Then we have the first convention, first constitutional convention, because the federal laws, through our Organic Act, right, established the relationship between the U.S. and Guam, allowed us to have our own constitution. But that constitution was required to be consistent with the sovereignty of the United States. We cannot basically have a constitution that says we are independent in any way, right? So this is the clause out of the Organic Act that says it must be consistent with the sovereignty. We must acknowledge the sovereignty of the United States. If Guam decides that it doesn't want to recognize the sovereignty of the United States, we can't have the constitution. So then that raised the question in my mind, is that really a democracy then? Can I really call this democracy? I can't call this democracy, right, if I'm told that I cannot be something that I am or want to be unless I have the permission of someone else. And so as a result, Guam has never gotten past the first constitutional convention. That was in 1970. Now, remember, our population now, which is why we always have to look at the history, our population now is about 160,000. The population of Chamorros is probably less than about 30,000 at this point. More than 65 to 70% of our island are non-Chamorros. And so the question has always come up, well, how do we determine self-determination? How do we decide what we should do when most of the people who are here are no longer the native people? Should the non-native people be involved in a self-determination? Why should they be? Right? Because it's a self-determination. It's the people of this land who should determine it. Well, when we were granted citizenship in 1951, the language that was used was the inhabitants of Guam prior to 1899. Meaning everyone who was born in Guam prior to 1899, a date specific, you were all automatically granted citizenship so long as you didn't seek it from another foreign country, right? Then in 1952 they changed that and they said everyone who resides on Guam, all the inhabitants of Guam before December 24th, 1951, if you're born on Guam after that date, you automatically are granted citizenship. Right? And so everyone who's been born on Guam since is automatically granted the citizenship. So then they tried to pass all these laws to try to move to this plebiscite, right? So that people could vote on self-determination. So then it became, well, who's the native inhabitants? Who are these inhabitants? And so after several failed attempts, because what happens is in the court system, they were rejecting the language as racist. That to use the word Chamorro, to say the Chamorro people can determine their self-determination. They said you can't base it on race because it violates constitutional principles. And we went, excuse me, but how else would we define Chamorro but the Chamorro people? Right? So we said, okay, the legislature went back to their thinking tank and they said, aha, we figured it out. We're going to use the congressional language to define who the inhabitants are because the federal government told us who we are, right? So we're going to use the Organic Act's language and we're going to say the inhabitants of Guam prior to December, 24, 1951, and everyone born thereafter is eligible to vote in self-determination. So this went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, can't use that. And I said, well, why not? They said, because then it's a pretext for race. Because then we know that what you're trying to do is you're trying to circumvent our determination of race, and now you're just going to use that language. So if we look back and we take a picture of what Guam looked like in 1950, remember, I told you this in the beginning, only 300 non-Chamorros were there. So they said, no, we're deciding that that is racist. So your definition of inhabitants is racist. So now Guam is stuck. Guam has been stuck in this place for more than 70 years because of all these determinations. And that case is called the U.S. Davis v. U.S. because we tried to have a plebiscite and a non-Chamorro white Caucasian man who decided to make Guam his home decided to challenge that law. So as a result of that determination, we cannot use the word Chamorro, and we can't say inhabitants are the people of Guam. So therefore, we're left with what exactly? No plebiscite, no vote. Unless, right, and this is something that has been discussed in Guam, is, well then, why don't we just have everybody on Guam vote? Right? And so the people who actually study the history of Guam and go like this, excuse me, but you remember those Chamorro people of Guam? Well, they were practically dead, right? There's about 30,000 of them on Guam. And so now all the people of Guam, if you look at Guam's makeup, it's foreigners and non-Chamorros. Not that there is an anti-position, right? I don't think there's a sentiment in Guam that those who are non-Chamorros should not participate at all. The problem is, if you talk to the people today, had there been a plebiscite vote in 1960, the likelihood is that Guam would have chosen some kind of self-determination. But today, we've spent 70 years educating people what it's like to be an American. The people of Guam know nothing. I was sharing a story about my 9-year-old daughter, right? Gives me, so when we talk about democracy, those of you who don't have children yet, I invite you to have plenty of children. You will discover what democracy means. There is no such thing as democracy when you have children, right? But I was so edified as a mother. So my daughter, at 9, we take her around to these, events for the bar associations. We involve her in community things. She's also part of an immersion academy where she is learning our language and our culture. Right, so she's really immersed in these things. And I took her to a Girl Scouts event, and we went around the room, and we asked the girls, right, after listening to the lives of all these different women in the law and what they do, we asked them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And my 9-year-old, she says, I would want to be the President of the United States, but I can't, because I'm born in Guam. But if I was the President of the United States, the first executive order I would issue is that all the territories would have the right to vote. As a mom, I was like, oh my gosh, this is where we need to begin. Right? Forget about these old people. I need to start here. And so this is also where it led me to kind of the educational component as well, right? In speaking to the people who write the laws and the people in education, I tell them, well, I'm sorry, but yeah, we teach our kids American history, but why don't we teach them Guam history? It's mind-boggling to me that we do nothing to educate our children, that basically what they're doing today is teaching them what it's like to be an American. And granted, I am an American, and I'm proud to be an American. And I think that America, in living up to our democratic principles, needs to recognize the rights of the citizens who live in the territories, right? Because when we don't do that, then our democratic principles are just in the toilet. I mean, when we deny even one person a right, then all of us are denied the right. And this is what we are taught in the American system. So as part of the work that I do, I think it's extremely important that we're utilizing the resources that we have within the network of the system of organization that we have. We've got to use that to advance not only the education, but the change in law. So that is also something that I'm working with, is I'm trying to convince our legislature to mandate all schools not only teach our language, but that they also teach the history of Guam and the territories.
Thank you very much.
I was just told by the interpreters, anybody, en español, perdón, cualquiera que necesite una traducción, hay equipo disponible, por favor, pueden ir a donde ellas que están allá. Muy bien. The next question is for Dr. Diaz-Sur by Silvia, and the first one always takes more time. Let's try to keep to the 4 minutes. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you all for being here. I'm really honored by your presence. So for Dr. Hadia Sur, my question is, how has the geographical proximity between the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, particularly the islands of Puerto Rico and Vieques, impacted popular movements against colonialism in both territories? Has there been a history of exchange and solidarity as our history of intermigration would suggest?
Thank you so much for that question. Of course, we are your neighbors in the Caribbean. I was telling one of my fellow panelists earlier that it's essentially about a 15-minute flight from St. Thomas to Puerto Rico. And so our big island, St. Croix, actually has a very large Puerto Rican population. And that Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latinidad solidarity has really shaped a lot of the ways in which we think through questions of coloniality, but also all of the possibilities for our freedom. And so like many other U.S. colonies, as we've talked about a bit in this conversation, our history with militarism is also quite a central feature of how U.S. colonialism took shape in the Virgin Islands. And so during our naval occupation period, our naval administration also had naval base and naval coaling stations in the Virgin Islands. And thinking through like a lot of the economic as well as like the environmental as well as the human impact of American militarized presence, of course, bears a lot of similarities to experiences in Vegas, as well as the ways in which displacement and gentrification in the Virgin Islands and our experiences with tourism and the dominance of a tourism industry that really escalates the cost of living on our island, thereby pushing out ancestral Virgin Islanders is also just a really key feature of the colonial order. And so we often in the Virgin Islands, instead of celebrating Columbus Day, we actually celebrate Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Friendship Day. And it's our way of really extending and appreciating and honoring our love, but also our shared ancestry. And I think something as Virgin Islanders that we often have to admit and speak about is that colonialism often also teaches us to divide ourselves and not always deeply appreciate our shared ancestry, our relationship, and our kinship with each other. And so in our own history, I think one of the more challenging aspects of our history is that the Virgin Islands are actually largely populated by people who migrated from the wider Caribbean, of course Puerto Rico included, and this has at times also produced tensions and has, succumbed to xenophobia that I like to say is seeded by the colonial order. But I think that it's important to acknowledge that, because a part of our challenges also in crafting a constitution for the Virgin Islands is that in having 6 constitutional conventions, we run through like 2 main problems, really. The first is, of course, U.S. dominance over the self-determination process and all of the ways in which they have rejected constitutions that we have put forward. Again, because claiming that it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution when we attempt to define and provide certain protections to ancestral Virgin Islanders, and also the ways in which previous constitution drafts coming out of the Virgin Islands have not explicitly recognized U.S. sovereignty. But really, one of the other challenges that we're really working through collectively is this question of what does it mean to be a Virgin Islander? And how do we carve an identity that is not overly determined by the colonial order, but one that also acknowledges our experiences as a diverse population of people from the Virgin Islands, from Puerto Rico, from islands such as Antigua and Anguilla and St. Lucia, Cuba, the Dominican Republic. And so for us, this question of identity becomes really central, because how do we find that balance of protecting an ancestral population while also doing so in a way that recognizes that many of our, I'll say kin, who come to the Virgin Islands from the wider Caribbean also have histories with slavery, with the aftermath of slavery, with colonialism and the displacement that colonialism breeds. And so in many ways, we're really attempting to define what it means to become and to be a Virgin Islander, and to chart a political pathway forward that really acknowledges an identity that really transcends any identity that could be forged by the colonial order. And so in many ways, so much of our political processes and our political systems are, of course, influenced by our proximity to one another. However, we are also a much smaller territory in the sense that our population post-Hurricanes Irma, Maria is like under 80,000, and our smallest island is a 21 square mile island. Our largest island is 82 square miles, give or take. And so with that being said, we often find ourselves seeking like solidarity and refuge with one another, and really thinking through what it means to be colonized, but also what it means to be free. And often when we do that work together, we recognize that our political system is structured a bit differently, and in the sense that we do not explicitly center the political status question in how we organize our political parties. We tend to kind of, I call it the pseudo model, where we pretend that we're Democrats and Republicans and independents, but the ideologies of those parties don't actually align mindfully with the ways that they are expressed in the continental United States. But with that being said, I think we draw a lot of inspiration from freedom fighters from Puerto Rico, as well as from the independence movement in Puerto Rico, for really thinking through how to good chart the pathway forward. And what I'll say before I wrap up my 4 minutes is that one of the things I love to think about often is really what I call like the question of the human. And I really draw from like Sylvia Winter's writing on this subject. I actually draw from Gertrude Gonzalez Allen's writing on like colonialism. And Gertrude Gonzalez Allen is a Crucian Virgin Islander from St. Croix, who is also Afro-Puerto Rican. And so in many ways, what really comes up is that colonialism, of course, is a system of like political, economic oppression, extraction. However, one of the underlying principles of colonialism is really determining what it means to be human. And a part of what colonial regimes have done, and a part of what slavery and plantation systems have done, is that they have really decided that some people are real humans who get all of the rights of citizens, and that other people, i.e. colonized people, Black people, Indigenous people, are not quite human, they should be regarded as property, as chattel, or that they are unfit for this concept of like sovereignty and really fully participating in the democracy of the nation. And so a lot of the decolonial work that I find that we're all doing individually and also collectively is really redefining like what it means to be human, really thinking through our relationship with the non-human world, and also recognizing that the colonization of our lands is also like the colonization of the earth itself. And so in many ways, like we are really looking to each other across the Caribbean, across the Pacific, across the Mariana Trench, to really decide that we're going to carve ideas of what it means to be free, and we're going to carve ideas of what it means to be human that defy colonial orders and boundaries and plantation systems, but are really rooted in all of the brilliance of our ancestors, of the earth itself, of our freedom movement. And so I think that it's always a blessing and a privilege to be able to play our role in that ongoing struggle for freedom.
Thank you so much, Dr. And I have to say, Right to Democracy, we've concentrated in building common ground, avoiding things that divide us, and concentrating in things that we have in common. And one of the first things I had to do when I started my conversations with my sisters in St. Croix, St. Thomas, St. John's, was go with humility. Because we as Boricuas, and I'm going to switch to Spanish because I want everybody to like really kind of like entender el espíritu de lo que voy a decir. Nosotros hacemos mucho ruido porque tenemos una historia, ¿verdad?, bien fatídica, importante, de violencia institucional que nos ha causado muchas heridas. Pero nos olvidamos de nuestros hermanos de las Islas Vírgenes. Muchos de nosotros ni sabíamos, yo no sabía, profesora de Derecho, que ellos habían tenido un intento el verano pasado de aprobar una constitución. Y nos envolvemos, ¿verdad?, en nuestras conversaciones. So, tuve que ir con mucha humildad para reconocer que ellos sufren de nuestro poder y nos ven como grandes y poderosos y acaparamos el discurso político, especialmente, ¿verdad?, en las áreas donde podemos incluso intervenir en los Estados Unidos porque tenemos más personas allá. Así que me quito el sombrero al trabajo que hacen allá y siempre con humildad aprendo muchísimo cada vez que hablo con ellos allá en las Islas Vírgenes, pero que sí con mucha humildad. Así que muchas gracias. Okay, now the question for Sheila Babauta is gonna be by Natalia.
Hi, good evening. So my question is, based on your experience holding key leadership positions in organizations related to environmental justice, decolonization, and democratization, what decolonizing strategies have you implemented to promote democracy and environmental justice in the Northern Mariana Island, and which ones have failed and which ones have been effective?
Thank you. Gracias for that question. When I got elected into office, I was 29 years old. And I had to rely on the elders around me, my allies, and words like decolonization, demilitarization, climate change, those were not common words in my community. And so there was really a big gap in forming strategies, some expertise and guidance. And so I started applying for fellowships, and I started applying for leadership programs. And I got accepted into the Obama Leaders Asia Pacific program. We were the first cohort, and we convened in Malaysia, about 300 of us. And during President Obama's remarks, he opened the floor for questions. And we were told we were not going to be able to ask questions. So I was not prepared, but I raised my hand, when he opened the floor. And another girl from Saipan next to me said, "Hey, look down here." And he said, "Hey, that's cheating. So I'm going to pick the girl next to you." And it was me. And so I asked President Obama a question about militarization. I shared that we have one of the highest per capita of enlisted servicemen and women, and it feels like we're at the table with Goliath. How does one prepare to negotiate with Goliath? Even though, Goliath was blind and David was like a sharpshooter. Side note. And so President Obama was very thoughtful in his answer. He gave me 3 strategies that have guided my work. And to this day, I keep it close. He broke it down into raising awareness, gathering allies, and unifying your voice. Unifying voices on what you want. And so, raising awareness has really allowed me to speak up, right? When I come from a community where these words, these concepts are so large, everyone's focused on the local politics, jobs and the economy and recovery from super typhoons. Since I've been home, we've experienced 2 major super typhoons. One super typhoon hit Guam last year, and then regular typhoons along the way, right? So there's a lot of disruption, including the pandemic. So raising awareness has really invited me to strengthen my voice, to speak up, to ask questions. And I do that everywhere. Everywhere I go, locally, public meetings, at the picnic table, at family events. Having those conversations are the hardest. Gathering allies, standing in solidarity, like what Addie was sharing, is something that we've been working on with our sister island of Guam. Because Guam is 30 minutes away, a $600 flight, the most expensive flight in the world per mile. And so we do have a monopoly by United Airlines. It's very difficult to connect and to heal this relationship with our sister island, because there's so much healing that needs to happen in our community. So that's why I serve on the board for an organization that's based on Guam, so that I can have this intentional, connection and relationship, consistent contact with our brothers and sisters on the sister island. And then having the opportunity to travel and represent the Marianas globally at climate change conferences, demilitarization conferences, Pacifica conferences, which I feel very privileged to be in a space where I'm with Oceania, because we have been so focused on our relationship with the United States that we forget we're part of this Oceania family. And we have so much in common, facing similar struggles around plastic pollution, overfishing, being on the front lines of climate change. And so standing in solidarity was such an eye-opener, because I was traveling the world standing in solidarity, building networks when Sister Island Guam was right there 30 minutes away, and it really invited me to think about our relationship with our sister island Guam. And the last one around raising awareness has been the decolonization work. You know, raising awareness to this relationship, we've had to be very creative because of that sentiment of being grateful for the United States presence. You know, they have food stamps and Medicaid, right? What are we going to do without them? If the United States was not here, China's going to invade us. That is such a deep-rooted fear that is so hard to penetrate, and then emotions get in the way, and you know, we have so many veterans, and so we have to get creative on how to get to the core of remembering where we're from, and reminding one another of how beautiful our home is. Our home is so beautiful, it's worth protecting, it's worth speaking up about, and that's been through cultural work. Cultural revival, restoration, history, working with our elders, you know, remembering that we can heal ourselves. We are surrounded by local medicine and healing methods that have been taken away from us. And so reconnecting to our roots has been my most favorite part of the work. We are also bringing back traditional navigation, which is so beautiful, using the stars to navigate the Pacific Ocean. No, thank you, United. I'm gonna get on the canoe. It's gonna take me 3 days, but you know, things like that have been so rejuvenating for my soul. Because this work is very heavy and can cause a lot of division in community and in family relationships, you know. So finding those moments, those experiences that rejuvenate your soul is so important. And working with the youth, staying close to my elders, and staying close to nature has been like my personal strategies on how to rejuvenate my soul. And I'm really grateful that for the past 2 days, Addie has been a wonderful host and friend, and has taken me to the waterfalls and the beaches, and I've just been so grateful to experience nature here in Puerto Rico, Puerto Rican. Yes. So thank you, Addie.
Gracias, Sheila. Así que la próxima pregunta es para la licenciada Naida Bobonis y la pregunta va a ser por Ángel. Ángel.
Muchas gracias. Primeramente, voy a decir una palabra a las panelistas invitadas. We are so grateful and we are honored to have you in your presence. Tonalidad, promesa representa un mecanismo legal, autoritario, colonial, el cual algunos sectores políticos y personas argumentan que es necesario para arreglar la situación fiscal y velar por los mejores intereses del pueblo. En tu experiencia trabajando con líderes comunitarios, ¿cuáles han sido las conversaciones en torno a la promesa y en especial sobre la supuesta necesidad de que este mecanismo autoritario y colonial es necesario para la rehabilitación social fiscal de Puerto Rico?
Ok. Llevo un rato como que aquí imaginando en mi cabeza porque, ¿verdad? Yo venía como con una manera de contestar, pero la verdad es que es bien difícil contestar esa pregunta. Por un lado, by the way, o sea, estas mujeres son maravillosas, evidentemente, y otra cosa que quería apuntar ahora es el hecho de lo similar en cuanto a cómo se han dado las dinámicas, creo que es algo que bueno, ¿verdad? Que se va a apreciar aquí en este espacio. Furia, que es la organización que dirijo, básicamente se dedica a ser una herramienta de liderazgo comunitario en su lucha, ¿verdad? Esto significa que nosotros tenemos distintos roles que van desde el rol de apoyar en una organización comunitaria, va el rol de dar servicios legales, va el rol de apoyar en estrategias de abogacía, como sea que eso se vea, dependiendo de la lucha que estemos trabajando. Así que cuando la pregunta es ¿cómo se ve promesa? Promesa se ve y se trabaja a través del trabajo directo, de la necesidad directa que nosotros estamos atendiendo con el liderazgo. nosotros vemos el impacto de las medidas de austeridad de promesa en las luchas que estamos tratando de apoyar. Ciertamente, en la medida en que hay medidas de austeridad, la gente tiene menos recursos para poder atender sus necesidades. Yo hablo rápido, me emociona, hablo rápido. Tienen menos recursos para atender las necesidades que tienen que atender. De por sí, nuestras comunidades en Puerto Rico, ¿qué hacen? De los corazones para poder atender sus necesidades. Así que imagínense, bueno, se lo imaginan, lo vivimos todos, ¿verdad? Un cuerpo externo que no conoce nuestras vivencias, no necesariamente las tiene que tener presentes porque su prioridad es atender asuntos fiscales. Cuando estaba verificando como que cuáles son los requisitos de las personas que son nombradas, es como que, bueno, conocer de negocios, conocer de gerencia, de administración. Y es como que este cuerpo, al final, pues eso es lo que viene, ¿verdad? Y un poco eso se ve en cuanto a sus decisiones y cómo esas decisiones impactan a nuestro país. Así que, en general, nosotros podemos ver el impacto de la Junta en la medida, bueno, lo podemos ver dependiendo de la situación, pero básicamente va a chocar en algún punto con la necesidad apremiante de la comunidad, porque las prioridades de promesa no necesariamente de la Junta de promesa y de la Junta de control fiscal no necesariamente van a ir consonas con la población, y la razón es pues, sencilla, porque es un cuerpo no electo, así que ellos no tienen que responder a las necesidades. Como esta economía se ve como aparte, como distante de las necesidades. Así que, ¿verdad? Sus prioridades no necesariamente van a reflejar las del pueblo. Igual hay una ansiedad en que pues, las luchas que queremos empujar, pues al final puede que queden bloqueadas en la medida en que este cuerpo tiene la autoridad de decir, por ahí no, porque no va consono con el plan. Y pues ciertamente choca con la metodología de la organización que dirijo, pues precisamente porque nosotros lo que aspiramos es a que los líderes comunitarios de las comunidades sean parte integral de sus procesos, o sea, de los procesos que les competen y les afectan. Así que, incluso, ¿verdad? Pienso que este cuerpo, pues básicamente retrotrae esos procesos de autogestión que tanto vemos en nuestras comunidades, que son la razón por la cual las comunidades sobreviven al día de hoy. Lo hemos visto históricamente, a medida en que las comunidades se mueven con los poquitos recursos que tienen, es que el país sobrevive a las desgracias y ese asunto de solidaridad. Así que, por otra parte, pienso, ¿verdad?, que al final no atiende a los asuntos de raíz, no tiene la conexión con nosotros, incluso se utilizan unos fondos públicos que se pudiesen estar invirtiendo en atender las necesidades de nuestro país, ¿verdad? Y yo creo que de eso va, o sea, hay un reconocimiento de parte de las comunidades con las que trabajamos de que es una realidad. Quería traer un ejemplo donde tuvimos que trabajar un asunto con la Junta. Estamos trabajando con unas comunidades en Yauco que se vieron afectadas tras los terremotos. Por alguna razón era bien difícil conseguir fondos para construir, son 30 casas, y ahí hubo como 20 conversaciones, era con el alcalde, después con el departamento de vivienda nos dice como que, si hay que hacerle una carta a la Junta de Control Fiscal para saber si ellos nos autorizan a utilizar estos fondos de la manera en que nosotros lo queremos, que para la construcción de casas de gente que se fastidió por los terremotos. O sea, en ese contexto, ¿verdad? ¿Qué significa eso? Pues obviamente el proceso se dilata, tenemos que hacer la carta, tenemos que esperar por la respuesta, etcétera, etcétera. Y la respuesta de la Junta fue, bueno, eso le toca al Departamento de Vivienda. ¿Por qué traigo este cuento? Porque no es tan solo la ansiedad que nos provoca eso de que, y si al final nos dicen que no, y si al final la Junta pone el bloqueo, es que incluso el Estado tiene ese temor de actuar. ¿Y eso qué hace? Hace los procesos más burocráticos. ¿Y en qué se convierte eso? En que la gente, al día de hoy, a 4 años después de los terremotos, no tiene las casas. Y Y verdad, eso es una situación bien difícil, sobre todo porque al final nosotros somos unas sin fines de lucro, que somos 7 personas tratando de apoyar a distintas comunidades en el país, y tenemos que bregar con que estas 30 familias, por distintos procesos burocráticos, al día de hoy están en un espacio inseguro. Así que nada, todo esto para decir que un cuerpo que retrotrae los procesos autogestionados, que incluso pone trabas para el mismo Estado, y lo otro, a veces lo usan hasta de excusa. Es como que, no, porque es como que este fin de, sí, yo lo voy a hacer. Pero la Junta me dijo que no. Así que un poco, ¿verdad? Al final el liderazgo de la comunidad tiene que seguir ahí empujando y empujando y empujando ante un cuerpo que no tiene por qué escucharle porque al final no les responde. Creo que eso.
Muchas gracias, Naida. Un poco para enfatizar uno de los puntos que acaba de decir, la perversidad de la colonia no es solamente una perversidad que viene del imperio, sino que realmente también hay una interacción con unas personas a nivel local que operacionalizan la colonia y la hacen funcionar para sus intereses y no para el interés público, ¿verdad? Y gracias por continuar el hermoso trabajo que hace Furia y el esfuerzo que le pone a esa organización. Y vamos a hacer una pregunta general, pero no la vamos a hacer para que el público haga preguntas, porque yo sé que ustedes tienen cosas que quieren preguntarle a las panelistas. ¿Quién quiere ir primero? Y Yalani, si puedes ayudar con el micrófono.
Hola a todas, todos. Mi nombre es Cris Maricuencas, soy estudiante de Salud Pública de primer año del recinto de Ciencias Médicas. Un verdadero honor estar con todas ustedes. Naida, gracias por siempre representar la comunidad y el feminismo puertorriqueño con mucho orgullo. I have a direct question for Dr. Sayer. Am I saying that right? So international bodies, particularly the World Organization of Health, have begun to recognize the commercial determinants of health as debilitating our health in general, particularly to the youngsters. As islanders, all of us that are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis, that we all know have been principally provoked by historically exploitative practices by private commerce. What words of wisdom could you give to us as we approach business magnates in the process of reflection and reevaluation of dignified life?
Thank you so much for this question. And it's actually such a big question in so many ways. And so I'll say very quickly something about what public health might look like in the Virgin Islands due to coloniality, and then something else about what I would say. And the thing about St. John in particular is we don't actually have a hospital on island. And so we actually don't have a public high school on island either. And so part of the expectation is that you travel to St. Thomas if you need to go to the hospital or you need to go to school. And so we recognize that that kind of neglect is really just baked into the colonial order at so many different levels and registers. And so, as it pertains to the question of what I would say to business magnets, I'm actually going to flip that around, and I hope that that's okay. But what I'll say is, what would I say to us? In the sense that I find that so often when we go to corporations and business magnets, asking them to see our humanity and to provide economic solutions to us. It often kind of puts us in this position of, and emphasizes a position of dependence. And I think that there are so many brilliant conversations that we can have with corporations about how they can make their philanthropy a little bit more equitable, how can they be more inclusive in their hiring practices, how can they actually have fair and equal wages, how can they think through the sustainable impact of their environmental impact, not only on the land but also on people in surrounding areas. But I think that the question that I always have for us is that, is it possible for us to reshape our approach to economy in the sense of finding sovereignty, not only in our political system, but also in economy? And so one of the things that we see in the Virgin Islands, for example, is we of course have EDC benefits that are given to corporations, i.e. those really high tax breaks that are given as incentives for corporations to be able to locate in the Virgin Islands. And we often ask our government, how can we actually make it more possible for small, locally owned businesses that have been in existence for generations, to actually receive the same level of incentives that would allow these corporations to be able to survive, but to continue to do a lot of the brilliant work that they've been doing in our communities. And I think about this like really personally. I get so sensitive about it, in part because I grew up in like the carberry business in the Virgin Islands. But my parents not only kind of created like this carberry company, but really my family's been in the marine industry in the Virgin Islands for centuries. And so we can really trace our seafaring, shipbuilding tradition throughout multiple generations in our family. And you know, one of our ports is named after my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was one of the first people to actually operate particular marine routes throughout like the Virgin Islands and nearby islands. But I actually find that so much of our policy assumes that the entrepreneurs in our community are not of our community. And so many of the benefits are offered to developers who are coming in from the continental United States, and those benefits often exclude and assume that these ancestral entrepreneurs are real entrepreneurs, or that they don't really know what they're doing, or that they perhaps should not receive the same level of structural and institutional support. But I think that if we are to have a dignified life, we have to have sovereignty. And I always like to quote George Lamming, because when he talks like in Sovereignty of the Imagination, one of the things that he really says is that sovereignty also is about our ability to direct our lives, define ourselves, control our material existence to a very large extent. And so I think that a lot of the questions that we can and should continue asking ourselves is, how can we continue to build and to support businesses in our community? How can we actually decouple like entrepreneurship from like Western capitalist models of entrepreneurship? How can we think through the ways in which so many of our small, locally owned businesses have really had values that are equitable, that are socialist, that are inclusive, that defy like coloniality, and actually are really doing the work of like decolonizing capitalism, decolonizing wealth, decolonizing a lot of our relationships to money, to power. And so the question for me is really always about how we can create and define and control our institutions, and how we cannot shy away from our own power, but actually continue to support and create our own institutions.
Thank you.
Gracias. Tenemos espacio para una pregunta más. Por ahí va el micrófono. Gracias, Yalanis. Hermosa Yalanis.
So cold. Hi, my name is Karina. I'm a first-year law student. And yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for being here tonight. It's been such an inspirational conversation. It's been an honor to hear and learn from you. And just out of curiosity, I was wondering, like, what is the possibility of creating, like, an official alliance of the territories to, like, foster and promote, like, more communication among the territories and, like, to fight colonialism, or is there already one?
I looked over at Addie and said, Addie, you should answer this.
Okay. So basically, last year, Neil Weir, Guamanian race lawyer, and me co-created this organization, Right to Democracy, precisely to build a movement to confront the colonial framework. And so we started by doing a listening tour through the territories and have conversations with community members. We did 6 in Puerto Rico, 3 in the Virgin Islands, 3 in Guam, 3 in North Mariana Islands, and 2 in American Samoa. And these 2 women here were part of that effort, organizing those dialogues. And what we learned was that, and there is a report in the webpage, you guys can go to the webpage. We have 2 reports, one that summarizes the work and another one that goes in depth into the discussions that were had in that listening tour. It's called Building a Movement, the Power of Listening. And what we discovered is the technique was to write in these big papers, take notes, other than having a transcriber, but having this, if you take the same question and put it on the wall, other than in Puerto Rico it was in Spanish, you would know where it was from, the answers, because the similarities are so present there. So we definitely thought we are on the right track here, and we're going to build a strategy around this content. And we convened a summit in New York City, November of last year, Summit on U.S. Colonialism. We brought people, they were all there, people from the territories, and had a conversation about, this is what we said, and is there a possibility to work cross-territorially to confront this colonial framework that affects us? And the decision was yes. We are, and so we created the Cross-Territorial Coalition with the mission to visualize and confront the colonialism, the U.S. colonialism in the territories. And actually, when we wrote the mission, we said, we're not going to say territories, we're going to say the names. Confront colonialism in Guam, North Mariana Islands, American Samoa, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. And we've been working since then. We have 5 committees. We work around policy, litigation committee, we have education committee, movement organizing committee, and indigenous and international rights committees. And we're working on 5 committees, and we do have a cross-territorial meeting of the whole group every 3 months. And we're working towards the 2nd summit that is coming up in February. And for example, one of the things that we're working in one of those committees is what the self-determination looks like for all the territories. Like, let's get together, sit down, and talk about what self-determination looks like. So we're talking about that in the policy committee. We're going to do a draft of a declaration. We're going to present it to the coalition, and the coalition is open to new members. And we are inviting people in the coalition, is inviting new people to form part of this coalition. And I have to be very honest, I think that this work is amazing, but the major challenge is resources. You know, Right to Democracy, it's like when she said 7 people in Furia, we're only like 5 people. And we really need to be resourced to be able to keep multiplying this work. And so part of our work of building this ecosystem and building this movement is visibilizing the fact that U.S. private philanthropy, for every dollar they spend per capita in the United States, in the States per se, they spend 5 cents in the territories. So it's like there are all these foundations are talking about democracy for all, multiracial democracy, and we're like, So what does that mean for the territories which has a colonial framework that is so insidious that it seeps into your concept of democracy? So that's what we're doing in Red Democracy, building this movement, and of course ask you all to join us, follow us, like us, and donate, and everything that anything that you can do to make this work more viable. Thank you so much for the question. So we're actually at time. I have to be very grateful for all of you for being here with us tonight on Monday at 6 p.m. That I know that Mondays are so difficult, but I want to have a recognition for our visitors. I have here presents. These are Right to Democracy presents, and I have to say, one of the biggest blessing is just to know these people and be their friends, but they always give me gifts. Like, this is from CNMI, this is from Guam, I have Virgin Islands in my hands, this is CNMI, I mean, it's crazy. I have here Puerto Rico, but I can get that myself. And also, the students from their part want to give also a gift. The gift from the students is actually art. Serigraphies that are done by very famous artists. Yes. And they want to share with you. One of the things we're working in Right to Democracy is cross-territorial arts initiative we're starting the dialogues this month with artists. We're going to do dialogues in Puerto Rico and one in the other territories to try to see if there could be like a decolonial monumental arts initiative together, because we recognize that art is one of the main ways to impact and change narratives that affect us. So thank you so much. I mean, I wish we could stay more, but there's class at 8, and these wonderful students are going to have to move all this and make space for the next class that is coming. If you guys want to join us, we're going to go to El Boricua. La voy a llevar a escuchar plena y a comer un poquito de flor de parcha. Si quieren venir, están bienvenidos. If you want to come and have a conversation with them more. So thank you so much y buenas noches a todas, todos. Y gracias a las intérpretes por estar con nosotros.